So Lucine was subjected to psychological torture, physical violence, economic abuse, and sexual abuse for 17 years. Her eldest daughter was also subjected to sexual harassment. And I mean, he was beating her for 17 years in, like I said, unconscionable crimes. I mean, unspeakable things that he did to them. For instance, he tied his eldest daughter up in a barn. He tied her up as well. He wouldn't let her leave the home. I mean, he basically was following her everywhere she went. He was overly jealous, controlling. I mean, everything that a typical abuser is. But he was, the severity of this case was very extreme. And Lucine came to us after the last incident where she had broken bones and she lost consciousness, and she was in a hospital. And we took her to the shelter, and after some time, after she regained her energy, she began to receive psychological support here at our center. She also was counseling with our lawyer, and she decided to press charges against her husband. And so that's when the court cases began. Basically, they came to the conclusion that despite all of the abuse and despite everything that she's been through, the husband got off on a charge of $300 because in Armenia there's a lack of law and mechanisms to punish perpetrators and to protect victims. So under Armenian law, they could only basically charge for the last incident by which she ended up at the hospital, but they couldn't charge him for the abuse that she had to endure for 17 years. And so that's why he got off on such a light charge. At the time, she could only take her two eldest daughters with her. So her youngest three children, two sons and one daughter, remain with the perpetrator and his family. And to this day, she has no rights over custody for her children. And because the abuser is financially well off or better off than she is, as of yet, there has been no push for her to gain custody of those children. So despite being an abuser, despite all of the unconscionable crimes committed against Lucine and her children, he continues to have custody over three of them. The fact that there's a lack of legislation specifically for domestic violence means that the women who press charges do so under these criminal offenses. And so only in cases of severe physical abuse does she even have a case. A lot of times we see that psychological abuse or economic or sexual abuse is just as traumatic, but with no way to actually show and prove and have evidence of that in court, she has no case. And so basically she can only be tried for the one instance of violence that was used against her that brought her to the courtroom, but she has no case otherwise. So basically what we're seeing are very light sentences. There was a case recently of Diana Ghapuzyan. She was stabbed 21 times, murdered in front of her two children, and recently the man got off on a charge of 3.5 years in prison for the murder of his wife in front of his children. I mean, this is what we're talking about in Armenia, with the lack of legislation, with women's sexuality being used in the courtroom as sort of a way to justify abuse, you know, other means to sort of justify abuse, whereas it's not taken seriously as a crime in and of itself. Lucine has been with us for a number of months now. Her two daughters are also with us at the shelter. While she's staying at our shelter, she takes part in all of the activities that we offer here at the center, which includes counseling, both with the lawyer, the psychologist, the social worker. She's also taken part in English classes. She's taken part in business trainings, entrepreneurship classes. So we're trying to get her back on her feet. It's still a bit soon for her to leave our shelter, and we're going to keep her a bit longer, but we're trying to basically help her, place her with a job, make sure that she can support her children. But because, you know, she's pressing charges right now and she's not in a place yet to leave our shelter, we'll still keep working with her and keep her at the shelter as long as she needs to stay, and that'll be up to her. We've never had to turn away women in the past, but recently we had to turn away a woman with her 5 kids because we just couldn't place her anywhere in the home. But there are only 2 domestic violence shelters in Armenia, one is ours. So together we can only host up to 30 women and children. And typically, you know, according to international best practices, you should account for 1% of the population. So for a population of 2.5 million, you know, you should be accounting for 25,000. We're at the place where we can only account for 30 people. So I mean, it's almost an absurd level that we're trying to keep up with the demand, women who need our services, and we simply can't, you know.